I'm Rizwana Baleem. I live in Rochdale. I'm 50, nearly 54 years old, nearly 55 actually. What year are we in? 2020, yeah, nearly 55. So I live in Rochdale with my foster child.
Where was you born?
I was born in Kenya, in Nairobi, in Kenya. Yeah, I was only very young. We came in 69.
Who lived in Kenya with you?
So I lived with my mum and my dad and my older sister, Gazala. And then 6 weeks before we came here, before we came to Britain, my brother was born. So he was born in Kenya, but he's not really lived there. And 6 months prior to us coming to Kenya, my cousins and my uncle lived with us as well. It was like a shared house. But then they moved to Britain 6 months before us, and they came and settled in Rochdale.
What was life like in Africa?
I don't remember very much because I was only little. I was 3.5 when we came. I just have snapshot images of what life was like there. I remember some things. I don't know if I remember if it's a memory because it's been discussed, you know, when family talk about things. But I grew up surrounded by local children as well as, you know, our family children. So we were just, all the children all just played all together. And I grew up learning Swahili, Punjabi and English all at the same time. So was fluent in Swahili until we came to Britain. And then over time, lost most of it because don't practice it.
Where was your parents born?
My father was born in, it was India then, before partition. He was born in Lahore. And my mother was born in Nairobi. My grandfather on my paternal side, he and my maternal grandfather were brothers. And so my paternal grandfather was also born in Kenya. But he left Kenya, went back to Pakistan to try and make his living there. And so then it was India then. So my dad was born there. My dad was the eldest child of, I think there were 13 of them altogether. And then my mum was, I think she was, I couldn't say what number child. And I think she was one of 13 as well. Yeah, so big families. So my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, he was Postmaster General in Kenya, in Nairobi. And so he was quite a well-to-do man. And he always thought about his brother and how to help his brother, you know, do better, do well. So my mum and dad's, their betrothal was arranged. So my mum and her sister, they travelled to Pakistan to visit. By then it was Pakistan. They went to visit to meet their prospective grooms, fiancés. And the only way they could do that was they had to go by ship. So that was a long journey. I think it's just from what I remember mum and dad talking about. I think it was about a 2-week journey. And then once they decided that, yes, they wanted those partners, then they brought them back. They came back with them. So my father actually emigrated from Pakistan to Nairobi to be with my mum.
What did he do there?
In Nairobi, my dad was a clerk. So he worked in offices. And I have seen papers since Dad passed away, and I've gone through his papers, all sorts of papers of jobs he's applied for and the promotions he went for. And then when it was decided that we were coming to live in Britain, we had to leave Kenya when it got independence and they were naturalising all the offices. So they wanted rid really of any British people. And because we were British, because my grandfather worked for the British, through that we had British citizenship. So we weren't allowed to stay in Kenya. So we had to leave. And just before we left, Jomo Kenyatta, who eventually became president, he asked Dad to sort out his office. And so Dad reorganised his office and, you know, made things more accessible and everything. And he said to Dad that he wanted Dad to come and work for him. And Dad said, well, 2 weeks' time, we're leaving, you know. And he was saying, no, it's all right. I'll give you Kenyan citizenship. You can stay. And it was all arranged. And Dad said, no, we can't, because we've got our passage booked. Dad had a job waiting for him in London. And of course, there was family here. So it was decided that, you know, we were going to leave. So the story could have been completely different. But, you know, Dad was fairly adamant that we were leaving. So he very nearly worked for the president of Kenya. So that's one for the history books.
You said your dad had a job in London?
Yeah. It would be an office-based clerk's job. So we came to Britain and we'd already sourced somewhere to live.
So you came to London?
Yeah, Dad had a job and we had somewhere to live. So we came, and before we'd even unpacked really, before we'd settled, my mother said, no, I need to see my children. Because my cousins, their mother, my mum's sister, she had died in childbirth. And my mum she'd looked after 3 of the children, she'd brought them up. And they'd moved to Britain. And their father, he worked in mills, he was a labourer. So at that time, in the northwest, there was a lot of mill workers. So they'd settled in Rochdale. So my mum kept saying, no, I've got to see my children. I can't cope without seeing my children. We came to Rochdale to visit. And when my mum saw the condition of the children, she was heartbroken. Because my cousins, both girl cousins, they had very long hair. They'd always kept it long. It was a source of pride to them and mum. And my uncle, he worked in the mills in the night time. He had a night shift. So a local woman was looking after the girls, and she'd got fed up of having to care for their hair and comb it out and everything. And she'd had it chopped into bobs. And my mum was just heartbroken that she saw that as neglect, really, and decided, no, these children needed her more than anything else, and point blank refused to go back to London. So then Dad had to rearrange everything, find accommodation here, get himself a job here. Luckily, he managed to get a job. He worked for Turner Brothers Asbestos. So he got an office job there. And we came to settle in Rochdale. So once again, life could have been completely different.
What are your earliest memories of being in Rochdale?
Being in Rochdale, I remember Ghazala, even actually when we were in Kenya, Ghazala used to they used to call it tuition. So it was like a sort of preschool thing. And when we came here, she was already 5. So she went to school. And I was heartbroken that I wasn't allowed to go to school. And I do remember chanting that I wanted to go to school as well. So as soon as, the year I turned 4 in that September, I started school. And it was just like, I was just one of them, because all the kids all went off to school. And I just wanted to be like them. And my earliest memory of my reception teacher, she was such a lovely, warm person. And every day I'd fall asleep at story time. So then my cousins would come to pick us up at home time, and she'd be waking me up. And when you're waking up when you've been asleep and you're grumpy, aren't you? And she'd send me home with handfuls of sweets. And she's such a lovely person. And if ever we were off school because we'd we'd had to go to the doctor, and she'd run into us and she'd give us handfuls of sweets, you know. And I'm sure it's because of her that I then decided I wanted my career and I wanted to be a teacher. And of course that was it, my mind was set. And then I remember when I was, it would have been the equivalent of year 1 now. I remember my teacher then and thinking, yeah, when I'm a teacher, I'll do it like that, or I won't do it like that when I'm a teacher. So my very early school memories, they were good memories, and so they helped me forge my career.
Which school did you go to?
Went to Haybrook School and came full circle, ended up as a teacher at Haybrook School, and that was my last full-time teaching job. So I taught at Haybrook for 11 years.
Which high school did you go to?
Well, we had middle school in those days. I went to Howth Cross Middle School. Now those were the happiest days of my school career. You know, as a pupil. I mean, I enjoyed my very early primary school. Later on, it weren't that great. But Howth Cross, oh my God, such a wonderful time. I think there we were really encouraged to become independent, to think for ourselves, to pursue, you know, activities and studies that we wanted to do. Really inspirational teachers. Very laid back, apart from one. Had an absolute nightmare with the history teacher in, I think it was third year, either second year or third year. And at that time, I was going through health issues. So I'd developed asthma, but I didn't know it at the time. So I had a lot of chest infections, a lot of pain in my chest. When we used to do cross country, I'd only get so far and I'd be breathless. And I don't know if you've ever experienced asthma. It's like you're choking, you're dying, you can't breathe. And then I'd end up having to stop and getting really upset. And when you've got asthma, the more you get upset, the worse it becomes. So I had a lot of time off school. And she was a bit of a dragon, this history teacher. And she stressed me out. So the more she stressed me, the worse I got. And she pulled me in front of the class and she was horrible. And she put me off history for the rest of my career as a student. I came back to it as a teacher, because when you're teaching, you've got to study it first before you can teach it. And I became fascinated by history, and I was really, really cross that because of her, I had missed out on a lot. So I always made sure, as a teacher myself, I never behaved the way she did. It's funny, isn't it, how the impact of people, you know, your teachers.
At Howth Cross, which was your favourite subject?
I don't know. I mean, everything was new then and seemed really hard at the time. And if I think back now it wasn't that hard, but everything, because all the subjects were separate, we went to different teachers. It wasn't like at primary, and it was much more formal. And I found quite a lot of that not difficult, but really had to try hard. Whereas at primary school, everything came easy. Middle school, I had to try a bit harder. I don't think I had a favourite subject, but I loved drama. And we had a phenomenal drama teacher. And every year she put on these amazing productions. And I always wanted to be in it. And it was only ever third years that got picked. So I went along for trials, you know, auditions for the production, and I got picked. And at first I got picked for just like a minor part. I was a bit upset, really, no lines or anything. And then the more we went to rehearsals, she changed my part to one with a lot more lines. I was made up. I was so happy. But then I think she fell ill. And that year the production didn't happen. And I was like, oh my God, I've been waiting all this time. I've been given the opportunity. And now she's gone off sick. I mean, I think I think she never came back to full-time teaching. So, unfair really, but I was a kid, and so I felt like I'd been robbed of this opportunity. But it was, she was, clearly the work I'd had done with her, in previous years made an impact. And then when I went on to uni, that was one of my major subjects.
How did you feel you fitted into school with your peers?
Throughout my school career, I've been one of very few non-white pupils. So there was only a handful at Haybrook. And again, in middle school and high school. So most of my friends were English pupils, English friends. At primary, I had, in my second to last and final year, I suppose it would be second to last year, one of my friends was a little English boy, and we were bosom buddies, and he left. He was a year older than me. He left to go to middle school. So then when I went to middle school and I saw him on the corridors, and I was, oh my gosh, do you remember? And he didn't want to know. Oh my God. I was heartbroken. My best buddy from primary, and he didn't want to know me because he was with his pals, and it was devastating. But I never had Asian friends, all my friends were white, because in those days it tended to be that most of the Asian children were in the lower sets, and they were in groups that needed extra help. Now, I don't know if that was they really needed that extra help, or if the teachers just assumed they needed that. So in the sets I was, there tended not to be Asian friends. And actually, after I'd left high school, gone on to college, and then gone on to uni, at uni I was the only non-white person there. So then after uni I started working. I worked in Oldham, and there was a lot of Bangladeshi staff, but they weren't teachers, they were all TAs, and I didn't fit in, coming from East African Pakistani background. I didn't fit in with them. So they were colleagues but not friends, and I didn't really have Asian friends until I started teaching at Haybrook. And at Haybrook there were quite a lot of Asian teachers, and it was amazing. I've never had Asian friends before.
Just going back to, you finished middle school, and when you were at high school and you had English friends, how did you used to feel knowing that sometimes they'd go out, and did you manage to socialise with them outside of school?
I had one close friend who was Asian, and I socialised a little bit with her. Didn't really socialise with school friends because we just didn't do that. You socialised with family, so you socialised with cousins. Anyway, by the time I'd gone to high school,
which high school did you go to?
I went to Balderstone High School. Yeah, no longer standing, unfortunately. But by then we had lots of responsibilities. My older sister, she's older by 2 years. She and I had responsibilities by then.
You went to Balderstone. After Balderstone, what did you do?
After Balderstone, when I went to Balderstone, I did 1 year at the sixth form, and everything seemed to be on track. And after that first year, tutor took me to one side and said, "Oh, we won't be asking you to carry on with the biology," because they were amalgamating 2 classes into one. Now, a lot of my peers had dropped out. So from my class, ended up only 2 people left. So they couldn't run a class with 2. So they invited the other guy to join the fuller class. But they said to me there was no room. And I thought, that was one of my favourite subjects, biology. And I thought, I can't do just one A-level, because I was doing English and biology, and then of course you did general studies in those days. I can't just do one A-level. So I decided, and that's it. well, there's no point me continuing, is there? I'll start again at college. So I made that decision myself, went to speak to my form tutor, and I said, right, I'm leaving because there's no point. And he was a bit taken aback, like, oh, right, okay. But when you're doing A-levels, I was 17. Yeah, that year would have been 18, almost an adult. And so I thought, there's no point me wasting any more of my time. Presented my case to him, and he said, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. So I left school, went home, and Mum says, oh, you're back early. Why are you back so early? So I said, oh, I've left school. And she's like, oh, what do you mean you've left school? Explained it to her, and she went, right, okay. So I had a slightly longer summer that year.
Can you remember that summer?
Yes. Yeah, it was just a glorious summer. In those days, we had proper summers, And it was just great because I looked up what I needed to do, went off to college, found out about it, and then I went to Rochdale College and I did my A-levels there and didn't pass. Well, I got grades, but not good enough for what I wanted because I wanted to go to teacher training college in Ambleside. And so I didn't get them. So what I did was I repeated. I did another year, got my grades, and then went off to Ambleside. And it was Charlotte Mason College in Ambleside, which is now the University of Cumbria. But in those days, it was teacher training college. But I did an honours degree. I did 4 years there in the Lake District.
How did it feel leaving home for the first time?
Well, I never asked Mum and Dad to leave home. I told them this is what I'm doing. And they knew I knew my own mind. And they just let me get on with it. And lots of people would say to them, why didn't you go to Manchester? But I had researched and the type of course I wanted to do, which was primary specifically. There was only 1 or 2 colleges that did that. And so Mum and Dad would say, well, the course she wants to do is there, so she's going there. And it's 100 miles away, so I would have to live there. And so that was an adventure. So when Mum and Dad took me, they came with me, they dropped me off. And that was it. And then they left and I was all on my own. But it was a very supportive college. And 2 young women came to find me. They were in the year ahead of me. And they came and said, they welcomed me and said, one of them said, I'm your college mum. So that's what they used to do at my college. So for the new intake, they'd ask older intakes to just support them. So they came, they showed me around, introduced me to lots of people, and I met lots of friends. And within a day, I'd settled. And it was, apart from middle school, which was a fabulous time, high school, not so much. I didn't really enjoy high school.
Why did you not enjoy high school?
Just high school girls are not very nice, and I didn't really mix with them because their lifestyles they weren't compatible, with mine. They weren't, they just weren't, we didn't gel. So I went to school to study and then I came home. I didn't really make deep friends there.
Did you ever feel that you've missed out not having friends at school?
No, because no, I didn't, because the people who were friends, I spent my time with them and I didn't get into the politics. Because the first year at high school, we were called third years. So 3rd and 4th and 5th years, lots of school politics and lots of cliques. And if you weren't with the right clique, they weren't nice to you, all of that kind of business. And I just didn't want to get involved in that. So until I got into sixth form, and sixth form was completely different. You got treated more like adults, and the people who were there wanted to be there because they wanted to do their A-levels, because they're no longer pupils, they're students then. They were much nicer people. So some of those, and a few people came to my school from schools that didn't have sixth forms, and I renewed friendships from primary and middle school. So that was nice. But I'm only in touch with a really small handful of them from my school time, and that's mainly on Facebook. One or two I might bump into, but I didn't recognise very many of them. Right, so I'm only in touch with a few friends, and that's mainly get each other's news on Facebook, and that's why I don't meet up with any of them, which is a shame, but you know, everybody goes their own ways, don't they? And then went off to uni. 4 years of the best years of my life. Loved it. First year, lived in. So and nearly everyone who went to Charlotte Mason lived in. And you were really looked after. You know, I had the biggest room in college, which was wonderful. But my roommate, we all shared, everybody shared. And they were en suites. You know, there was 1 or 2 toilets and showers per floor. So it was all shared resources and everything, shared amenities. But by Christmas, my roommate had decided she didn't want to do this. It wasn't for her. So she left. And she was an older student. And she didn't really fit in with my clique, you know. So she decided she wanted to leave. So there's me with the biggest room in college on my own. And I thought, I can't really do this. So there was a couple of young men who were in a tiny room. So I offered to swap with them. Well, of course, they jumped at that chance. And then I went into this bunk bedded room. And it was the coldest room in the world. It was an old building, the windows. In the end, I got the caretaker to come and seal up the windows to cut out the drafts. But I made good friends with another girl whose roommate had left at the same time as mine. And prior to that, we didn't really know each other. We knew each other in passing. But her mate had left, and so she offered her biggish room to another couple. She went into a small room. I went into a small room. And we sort of gravitated towards each other. And we became bosom buddies. And she was closer to me than my family at the time. We did everything together. And, people would say when they'd see one of us, oh, where's the other one? Because we were joined at the hip. And after 4 years together, when she left, I think a year later, she got married and asked me to be her bridesmaid. Oh. So I was her bridesmaid 30 years ago. Yeah, it's 30 years since I graduated. Long time ago. But oh my God, college years, they were fantastic. We did so much, so many adventures and things I'd never done before. And, you know, because we lived in the Lake District, lived in Ambleside. You had to get involved and went climbing, abseiling, all sorts of things. I remember one time we did a moonlight walk up Fairfield Horseshoe, and that's a 12-mile walk. And we did it on a night when there was an eclipse of the moon. Why we did that, I have no idea why we did that. It was freezing. It was a really steep climb on the way up. And then once we got to the top, the weather had come down really bad, blowing an absolute gale. We huddled against rocks. And I'm thinking, why the hell am I doing this? And then most of the night we walked. And by the time we'd finished, I was exhausted. But it's an experience, and it stuck in my mind. You know, every part of that walk I still remember. But that was a different group of friends. It wasn't the group of friends I mixed with most of the time. It was like an adventurous group, and it was really fun to be with people who did that kind of thing. Yeah, so it was good. But for those 4 years, I was vegetarian because there were no halal shops, no Asians at all. And then when I'd moved out, in my second year, we had to move into our own accommodation, and I moved in with a group of girls who to this day we're close in that we know each other's news. We don't see each other anymore, but you know, we keep up with each other's news, and we were very close for the 2 years that we lived out. And then in my fourth year, moved back into college, because that was a really busy year, because we had a 10-week teaching practice, and then all our exams and dissertations and lots of coursework. So to make it easy, so you weren't faffing, looking after yourself, cooking and all of that, all of my little group decided we wanted to move in. So we moved back into halls of residence, and moved back into the same halls that I'd gone in first year. And all of us did that. We all moved into the halls that we'd gone into initially.
When you was at uni, did anybody ask you about your ethnicity?
I was the only non-white person there, and I think whilst I was there, we had the college's centenary. It might have been while I was there, or was it just, I can't remember actually. But I was only ever the second non-white person there at the time when I was there. They may have had more since then, but there was no people no BAME people at all. And in the village, you know, I mean, people got to know me, and nobody questioned anything. It was a time when, you know, when people go to uni, it's a time for firsts. So it's the first time they can legally drink, and first time they can legally do this, that and the other. And when we socialised, when my friends came out with me, we had a lovely time, and they didn't drink as much. But when they went out without me, they all got totally bladdered. You know, so it was like, I was almost like a calming influence on them. And out of respect for me, they didn't get completely drunk. But when I wasn't there, they did. So it was nice that they had that respect. So that was good. And Ambleside being where it is, there's not much nightlife. There's no clubs or anything. The nearest clubs are in Kendal, and we couldn't afford the transport out there. And the college I went to, the majority of the students, out of 112 in my year group, only 18 were male. So it was a very female place, you know, female led. And it was a strange lifestyle then. I was experiencing a different culture, really. Because throughout my school time, you've got your foot in two different cultures, haven't you? You've got your home culture and your community, and then you go to school, and that's a completely different culture, and you're straddling two cultures there. While I was at uni, I was more or less immersed in the white culture, and there were some things that, you know, I was sort of ambassador for my community, and while I was there, we did talk about encouraging more BAME students, and they were going to start a programme, and my dad got involved and brought a coach load of students up and their parents to show them, you know, what it was like if the kids chose to come to there, how they'd live, and then that they were going to try and do some sort of an access course, so you wouldn't necessarily do A levels to get into that course. And then whilst I was there, it didn't happen. Whether it eventually happened or not, I don't know. But it was difficult, because when I was growing up, Asian girls didn't go to uni and live out. If they went to uni, they stayed at home. And in my family, I was the first person to go to uni. So, and I mean, that opened the door for other people, the rest of my family who went. And then it's the norm now. But at that time, it wasn't.
How did it feel finishing university, going back home?
I came back home to live with my mum and dad. But before I'd even finished university, before I'd even done my exams, I'd been offered a job. So I knew where I would be working. And actually, the year I was going to start teaching was the year they'd changed over from middle schools to high schools. Just so I left my primary school at the end of year 5, and then had 3 years at middle school. Then went to high school, and they changed it so that you stayed 1 more year at primary school and then straight to high school. I think the system I went through was better.
By the age of 13, how many siblings did you have?
There was the 6 of us all together. My mum she'd had failed pregnancies and stillborn children, and then one boy who lived for a year, just over a year, and he died just before Ghazala was born. He died just after my mum's sister passed away in childbirth. So you can imagine, can't you? Mum had this little baby, and she was pregnant with Ghazala at the time. And then her sister passed away, and she'd taken on these kids. So then when her son, he passed on, he got pneumonia, and she put it down to her own neglect of him. But it wasn't. She blamed herself for being so wrapped up in the other children that she didn't give him the care he needed. But she did. It was what it was. That was his life. So there could have been 10 of us. But as it was, there were 10 of us because there was the 6 of us. So myself and my 5 siblings. And then the 3 my mum had brought up. And then the baby who'd been sent to Pakistan to be brought up by another aunt. Because my uncle, he felt mum already had a baby. She was pregnant. She couldn't cope with another baby, but she could cope with the toddlers. So he was sent to Pakistan. He came when he was 11. So he came. So by then, there was the 6 of us, the 4 of them, and then our next door neighbour, she was a very sickly woman, ill a lot. And her 2 children were around at ours all the time. So actually, in our house was brimming with kids. And then, of course, all the local kids were in and out. And so, there was a lot of us.
When you say you had 6 paternal siblings, how many brothers and sisters were you? Right,
so I have 2 sisters and 3 brothers, so with 3 of each. And I'm number 2 out of 6. So I've got an older sister, older by 2 years, and my younger sister is younger by 10 years. Yeah, completely different characters, those 2. And then the 3 boys in between. And my brother, who was born in Kenya, he's 3.5 years younger than me. And he and I were quite close until he was about 8 or 9. And then that was it. He wasn't interested in playing with his sister. I was, older by then. And that was it. He was off with his mates.
You talk about responsibilities.
Yeah, well,
you and
because
Ghazala
there were
had,
so many of us, it had to happen. Now, my mum very subtly trained us up. Now, we didn't realise it at the time, but she'd send us to the shop, and she's to the local shop, which was like, only in those days, the roads weren't busy, and we'd been taught how to cross roads and everything. So she'd send us to the local shop where it was safe to go to, safe to cross, and she'd send us a few times a day. And you'd think, I've only just got back. Why didn't you tell me? But actually, she was teaching us. She was teaching us how to go, how to become independent, how to look after your money, how to make sure you came back with the right thing and the right change. Because with every trip, sometimes you'd come back with the right things. Sometimes you've lost your money on the way there. Sometimes you lose your change on the way back. Because children they're not 100% focused, are they? So what she was doing was training us up. So by the time I was 11, 12, me and Ghazala, we were, it was our job to make sure had to look at the larder, go through the cupboards, what do we need, make the list, check with mum, yeah, this is what we need. And then we would walk to the local co-op. Now, it was where Mecca Bingo is now. That used to be the co-op. So we'd have to walk with a little granny trolley. And it would be our job to do the shopping. So we had the list and we'd go around and constantly adding up to make sure we had enough money. So, because in those days, they didn't have automated tills. Do you know, they had the old tills that you rang everything up. And we had to make sure we had enough money, that we hadn't gone over. And if we had gone over, what were we going to put back before we got to the till? So constant, as we're going around, we're adding up. We get to the till and we're still adding up just to make sure everything was right. So when it came to shopping, that became our job. And it was a big shop. It wasn't one or two things. It'd be a major shop. So that was our responsibility. And also, she was teaching us to cook at the same time. So we would take it in turns. One of us would do the chapatis one night and the other one would wash up, and then we'd swap. So, and then because the little ones, the boys, they were still being bottle fed and whatever. So that was my job, boiling the milk for them. And I remember Irfan particularly liked, you know, the skin on milk with a little bit of sugar sprinkled on it. So I had to, you know, skim the milk for him.
What did you used to do for toys and spare time that you had?
We didn't have toys. We didn't have toys because Dad, well, he had a reasonable job. It didn't pay the best, and he was paying off a house, 6 of us to look after, but also my cousins, they were around a lot. So that's a lot of mouths to feed. And also Dad was sending money home. So he was sending money back to his mother. And he brought up virtually, you know, financially, his siblings. And when they grew up, they all got married. Dad made major contributions to all of that. And then when they had children and they were getting married, Dad was still supporting his family. And he always said, you know, it was his job to support his mum and dad because he was the eldest and he'd been given the opportunities. Because his siblings, none of them worked in careers or jobs that paid well. So they barely looked after themselves really. And Dad did all of that. And so because Dad did all of that, we didn't have extra money. We had everything we needed. We didn't have extras. And Mum still, you know, made a fuss of us on birthdays and Eid or whatever. And she'd always make sure she cooked our favourites and all of that. So we weren't spoiled in terms of toys, but certainly affection. We had plenty of that. But we didn't need toys because we played out. We played out all the time. We played out until it got dark, you know, and we roamed. Mum didn't realise how far we roamed. We'd miles away, and you know, oh my God, the things we used to get up to. And she always said to us, don't play down by the river. And in those days it was very wild. I mean, it's been somewhat tamed and, you know, all cut back, and lots of the banks have been, they've got concrete banks now, but when we were little it was completely wild river. And we used to go down the river and we'd catch tiddlers, you know, tiny sticklebacks. On we'd have margarine tubs, you know, the margarine tub lids. We'd catch on that and put them in the margarine tub. Or we'd catch tadpoles, and we'd start off with about 6. By the time we've gone home, there'd be one left because he's eaten all the others. So we used to have lots of fun like that. And when we'd go home, Mum would say, you've been playing down the river, haven't you? And we'd think, you never step out of the house, how do you know? Never realised at the time. When we came back, we stank. Because playing down the river, it was dirty, and we stank. And she always knew when we played down the river. But we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of silly things. We went through a phase of where we liked to build fires. So we'd take newspaper from home and we'd try and find sticks and things out in the wild, you know. and we'd steal matches from home and try and light fires because, you know, we'd try and pretend we were camping and the stuff we got. God, if Mum had known we were doing that, oh, we'd have been leathered. And then we played all sorts of daft things. One area we used to play near, there was a lot of garages, and there was a lot of soft stone, almost like a sandstone, which you could carve really easily with a harder stone. So we'd be making doll's house furniture and we'd be making chairs, and oops, you've gone through again. Oh, well, there's another toilet for the house. But, you know, lots of fun things like that. And then my brother, Umar, his best friend, his granddad was a caretaker in a mill or a factory or something. And we used to go and we used to play in it. And very naughty, very dangerous. Because there used to be these huge hooks that they would transport, you know, big bobbins on. And we'd be sliding, you know, like, I know, it was really dangerous. And we'd be hanging on and sliding at, you know, 20 feet up in the air. We didn't realise it was dangerous at the time. We just thought it was fun. And then the granddad he'd make us cups of tea in tin mugs, which were black with tannin, and we'd be like, oh, but he's made us a cup of tea, so we'd have to drink it. We had some good times. So when I was a qualified teacher, there wasn't that system. So all the teachers from the middle schools were all being redeployed. So there were no jobs in Rochdale. So I applied for the Oldham Pool, and I went for an interview, and there was one of the advisory teachers, he was interviewing me, and a head teacher, and there and then he offered me a job at his school.
What was the school like?
Well, he said, you don't have to say yes, come and have a look at it. So he took me to his school, and outside is this imposing Victorian building, you know, this just brick building straight up down, featureless from the outside. It looked really imposing, and I thought, oh, I don't want to work here. But once I stepped through the doors, it was a different picture, and I said yes.
How long did you work there?
11 years I worked there, and my colleagues, I'm still friendly with all my colleagues from there, and my best friend who I've, you know, travelled with, and I'm still in contact with. I mean, we can not have seen each other for about a year, but as soon as we meet, it's like no time's been spent apart. Those relationships I forged there they're lifelong and really strong. And the staff there, I was so happy there. I mean, there was a little bit of bullying went on, and in the end, I left because of that. I thought, I don't need to put up with this, you know, I'm an adult. And but I was sad to go. 11 years I worked there.
What was the most inspirational aspects of your job there?
The children there were 100% Muslim, and it was a voluntary aided Church of England school. So the church had a little bit of input, but not much really. So it was nice. Because of that, we had a bit of freedom. But the difference we made to those children, from when they first came, you know, hardly knowing anything, to when they left at the end of year 6, the achievement was phenomenal.
Which year did you teach?
I taught all year. Well, I didn't teach reception. I started off in year 1 and 2, and then I did a few years there. Then I moved into 3 and 4, and then I did 5 and 6. And year 6 were my favourite year group. The children they're quite mature. You only need to give them an idea of something, and they'll run with it, and they'll organise you, and you'll just say, I need this, and they'll do it for you, you know. And so I loved teaching year 6. 5 and 6 I had. And I know I was influential with quite a few of them, because when you see them develop, and when you have this shy little thing at first, and then he's standing up and saying, in a debate, I challenge you, you give me your proof. And I started thinking, my God, start of the year, you wouldn't even lift your head up, you know. And so seeing how the children developed was amazing. And there was I remember two little ones I had when I was in year 1 and 2. They were year 1 twins, a boy and a girl. And then when I was working at Haybrook, I'd left St Hilda's, I'd worked there 11 years, came to work at Haybrook, and I'd been, at lunchtime I'd been out, I'd been going somewhere, I'd been on a course or something. When I came back in the afternoon, we were having interviews for prospective, new teachers. And this young man just comes flying at me, ready for a hug. And this young man, full on beard and everything. And I put my hands out like, oh, hold on, I don't know you. And he was going, oh, Miss Baleem. And he said, don't you remember me? And I said, no. And as soon as he said his name, I could see the little twins. And so he was this teacher then. And he said to me, because of what you said when I was in your class, I built my career on that. And he'd gone into graphic design because when he was a little 5-year-old in my class, I'd said to him, oh, you're a good artist. And he'd just see how your words can mean so much and can influence a life. And I had this throwaway comment. So when you're a teacher, you've got to be careful of what you say, because the right thing can really encourage someone, but the wrong thing can do exactly the opposite. So that's one of the highlights of being a teacher, is seeing how they develop, and how a child, if you just push them in the right way, can just blossom.
What can you tell me about family life now?
Family life now, well, I foster now. I gave up teaching to foster. I looked after my mum and dad. So when they were older and they were infirm, I nursed my mum and she passed away. And then my dad got cancer. So with my other siblings, I looked after him and he passed away. And when he passed away, I'd always had fostering in the back of my mind because my mum had done it. She'd fostered my cousins, fostered next door neighbour, various children, and she always said we should foster. And at that point, Dad had said, no, we can't, because she wasn't in the best of health. So in the back of my mind was always, I should foster. And then I thought, am I just replacing looking after my parents? And I thought, no, I'll give it a while. And I did, I gave it a while, and I thought, no, it really is something I want to do. So I made sure I was financially secure. I made sure I could pay off my mortgage. And then I went for it. And at school, I wasn't happy. I'd been having a lot of stress at school and it was impacting on my health. And I thought, nah, I can't be doing this anymore, because I was with Ofsted constantly being thrown at you. I was changing the way I taught, and it wasn't the way I believed. I was having to teach to the test to prove that I was making some progress with the children, or the children were making progress. Every 6 weeks we had to prove that the children were making progress. And it's ridiculous, because that's not how children learn. And when I was having to, because my neck was on the line, I was having to teach to the test, I thought, no, this is not what being a teacher is about. I'd specifically gone to Charlotte Mason because of the way they were promoting teaching about the whole child, and everything is based around what the child needs and not what Ofsted wants.
How long have you been fostering for?
I've been fostering for nearly 8 years now. So in December it'll be 8 years, and I've fostered 11 children.
When did your parents pass away?
My mother passed away in 2008, and the day my mother passed away is the day that the child that I'm fostering at the minute was born, that very day. So she was meant to come to me, weren't she? So I'll never forget that date, because it's her birthday. So she died in 2008, and then my dad passed away 18 months later in 2010. Yeah, my mum had had a lot of ill health in the last 10, 15 years of her life. But my father developed lung cancer. So he had a short illness, really. He wasn't ill that long. But he died of a broken heart. They'd been married 52 years. And, you know, never a crossword between them, ever. And I'm not just saying that. We never saw them argue. If they fell out, they gave each other the silent treatment for a day or so. And that was it. And there was never any arguments or anything. So they had a very happy, long, successful marriage.
Your dad was very well known in the community. Can you just share some of that with us, please?
Yeah, when we first arrived in 1969, there was very little provision for Muslims here. And Dad and his best friend at the time, they developed the mosque and affiliation with a UK Islamic mission. And so they took over a house, a big old house, converted it into a mosque, and that was on Hare Street. And then they called it Nili Mosque, so the Blue Mosque. So for many years it was this old house, and they were one of the first mosques that had any provision for women. It was terrible provision because you had to go round the back and down the cellar stairs, which were always dark and damp, and there'd be frogs and all sorts. And the wuzu arrangement there wasn't brilliant. It was awful. But nevertheless, there was provision for women. So I do remember going for Jummah prayers, and, you know, in Ramadan, we'd go for prayers in the evenings.
How old was you at the time?
Sort of 7, 8, yeah, around that. Up until we were sort of hitting puberty, really. And then after that, you don't want to get involved, do you? So Dad had this mosque that him and his best friend had developed. And
what's your dad's name and your dad's friend's name?
My dad's name is Mohammed Sharif Baleem. And I don't know his friend's name, but
you knew him as uncle.
Yeah, he was uncle, yeah. But his wife was my mum's best friend, Auntie Rashida. I remember that. And their children are still lifelong family friends of ours. And in fact, my brother now works with one of his sons, one of my dad's best friend's sons, you know, that's how strong the link was. Yeah, so Dad had made this mosque, and then many years down the line, you know, he spent all his time there, and it needed a lot of upkeep. And they started fundraising, and they wanted more of a community mosque, and they wanted it, you know, where St. Chad's is now, at the top of the town, you know, behind the town hall. And there was some land just across, which was made available. So we tried to fundraise, but we couldn't fundraise in time quick enough to buy that land. That would have been perfect. Mosque opposite the church, lots of community links. Anyway, it didn't happen. You know, the fate wasn't on our side. So slowly they managed to raise enough funds. So before they could build a purpose-built mosque, they had to raise the one we had to the ground. So that would mean there'd be no provision. So what they did was, a local businessman he had 2 shops on Durham Street, and he offered those to Dad and his committee then. And so then they adapted those buildings. They weren't brilliant, they weren't great buildings, but they were good enough for now. And so Dad built another mosque there. And by then his friend had passed away, obviously. And so Dad had lots of close friends and committee members, and who all worked together. They all worked really hard. They'd turned those shops into a short-term mosque. And then the real business of, you know, trying to get the funds for the big purpose-built mosque. And there was a lot of hard work, you know, knocking on doors, walking streets, going everywhere. Dad was going to go to Saudi to go fundraising. And the night before him and his friend were due to leave, we were burgled. And his briefcase with his passports, his friend's passport, flight tickets, some money that they needed to travel with, all got taken. So that trip never happened. Whereas if that trip had happened, we could have had all the funds to be able to start the mosque. So it never happened. But I always say there was a reason for that, right? So God knows best. So then we raised enough funds to start the mosque, and they wanted to buy the house next door, and he wouldn't sell. So they built the mosque on the land they had, and it's absolutely beautiful. And we used experienced, skilled craftsmen, and Dad was the he was the what do you call it? He was the person who oversaw everything. Project manager, that's it. So he was the project manager for the whole mosque. He ordered everything for the mosque, you know, all the building materials. He had lots of links and developed really good relationships with local suppliers. And then when we wanted the domes built and also the windows, I'd seen a documentary on when the Trafford Centre was built, and they'd used glass that you can see through from the inside, but you can't see through from the outside. So I'd spoken to Dad about this. So he researched it, and he found some. And it had to be blue because Neely Mosque. And then we got some fitters from, I think they were from Poland. So they came across because they had the skills on how to erect the dome and everything. So, you know, Dad looked after them while they did all of that. We found them accommodation and, you know, met all their needs and food and all that so they could build our mosque. So the mosque was built, and it's beautiful. And the nicest thing is the dome room, the top room, that was always given over to women on a Jummah, and Eid. There's always Eid prayers, and that's the room for women. And it's brilliant. It's beautiful. Since then, they've acquired that extra house. So they got rid of that, and now they're extending the mosque. And it's really sad that my dad's not around to see it. But he saw the mosque built and running, and it was running a long time. I mean, they've changed all sorts since he passed away. But it's always my dad's mosque. And I feel a little bit territorial, really, when I go there. This is my dad's mosque. And it's funny, when I was at Haybrook, we were taking children from school to the mosque to do tours, because they do that. And I took my class, and they were dead excited about everything, and they loved visiting. And I took them around. My dad would stop and explain everything to them. And then these children, right, they're getting so excited and they run on ahead of you. So I knew what was coming. So I let them run on ahead and into a little room. And they're standing in this room, they're looking around. And so they had to wait for me to catch up. So I caught up, and I'm stood in the doorway, and I said, right now, do you know what this room is? And they're all excited. No, what's this room? And I went, well, this is the room where you wash dead bodies. You've never seen a room empty so quick. Straight out. So that was funny. That was quite funny. And then when we went back to school and they all wrote thank you letters, the one thing they were all dead pleased about was thank you for the crisps, because Dad had given everybody a packet of crisps. So they didn't remember anything else, but they remember the crisps. But it's a community mosque, you know, so everybody goes there. They do all sorts of things. And I'm hoping to go into the mosque to do some work myself with some young ladies. So I do work on domestic violence and raising awareness of and honour-based violence and abuse, and forced marriage and child sexual exploitation. So we're going to go in and do some work with the girls. Inshallah, that happens eventually. You know, COVID lets us. Yeah. So yeah, I have very close links with the mosque. Always had those links.
What's the fondest memories you have about life?
About life? Family. You know, lots and lots of family time. Growing up, we always had visitors. I mean, sometimes it would annoy us, but every weekend we had visitors. We had family over. And, you know, we were quite lackadaisical, really. We'd leave homework till Sunday night. And then, you know, we've got visitors and it's like, oh, for God's sake, please go home. We got homework to do. But every weekend we had guests. And on those weekends when we didn't have family guests, Dad would host conferences in the mosque, but then he would bring everybody home for meals. So Mum was cooking constantly, and they loved coming to Rochdale because they got really well fed. And we just our house was always full of people. A lot of friends, my mum's friends, would come round. Towards the end of her life, Mum got quite agoraphobic and wasn't leaving the house, and her friends would come to her. So there was always people in our home. If it wasn't family, it was the locals. It was Dad's friends. It was Dad's friends' wives. Our house was always overflowing, and because of that, mashallah, there was barakat in the home. And we never went hungry. We didn't want for anything, because my mum and dad were so welcoming. Then we had that love returned to us. And Dad taught in the mosque, so Dad was like the head of the mosque, really, and he was also the chief education officer for the Northwest. He was Nazim for the Northwest with the UKIM. So he set the syllabus and he set the exams, and then he would take a sample of the exams to make sure the marking was right. And, you know, because every 2 years, each stage had exams, and then there was all sorts of award ceremonies. And so Dad was responsible for all of that. But Mum did the same at home, because Mum taught children to read the Quran at home. So we always had a house full of children learning to read the Quran. You know, so there was always children in our family, in our house. And our house was just always, there was always lots of love, lots of laughter. Mum and Dad also, whenever our family members were getting married, Dad would do the cooking. So Dad would cook the night before. What happened was, my mum's cousins had come to Britain and settled in Bradford a few years before we'd come, and they were dead glamorous, my aunties. You know, they were beehives, because they'd come in the 60s, and very risque because they had sleeveless tops and, you know, that kind of, and they all took on English names, and it was funny. It was funny because all these glamorous aunties and uncles, you know. And when they were growing up and getting married, one of my aunties particularly, she would do all the cooking. And in those days, weddings were at home and we were overflowing, and we used to go and we go and stay for a few days with, it was my mum's aunt, who was a second mum to my mum growing up. So my mum just loved her. So, you know, we found her a little bit strict, a little bit scary. But her children, her daughter, my aunt, she did all the cooking. So my dad said to her, when you get married, I'll cook on your wedding. Mm. So he cooked for her, and it became a family tradition that Dad cooked for everyone. So whenever there were family occasions, we were there in the thick of it. And it was, weddings in those days, very different to now. You know, we didn't have, you know, proper cutlery and crockery, and we had paper plates and, you know, paper tablecloths, but it was a family affair. We did the serving, we did the hosting, and we learnt all those skills. Kids don't do it now, you know. So all family occasions were whole family occasions. Family life is what I think about most.
Is there anything that you'd like the listeners to remember you by when they hear this interview?
No, just that every stage of your life has memories, has you know, there's something good in every stage, and you develop throughout. And so make the most of every opportunity that's thrown your way. Everything is a learning curve. Everything is a learning opportunity. So make the most.
Thank you so much, Rizwana, for your time. Thank you for everything, and I wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you.